So this is Fast for Voice technical material, and we're going to identify for you, but very quickly I'm going to give you a couple preview words. Department of Epidemiology, estrogen, primarin, polychlorinated biphenyls, electrophilic metabolites, cellular macromolecules, carcinogenesis. I am Mr. Mosseri for defense.
I'm the witness, sorry.
I'm attorney for defense one, Mr. Gibbs.
I'm plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Costello. It's examination by Mr. Costello for the record. Doctor, would you state your full name, please?
Noel Scott Weiss,
What is your address?
4434 137th Avenue, Northeast Bellevue.
How long have you lived in the state of Washington?
About 4.5 years, a little over 5 years.
Are you employed by the University of Washington?
That's correct.
In what capacity?
I'm an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology in the School of Public Health and Community Medicine.
How long have you been employed at the University of Washington?
For the full time I've lived in the state, a little over 5 years.
Are you in the same department as Dr. Brizzi?
No, we're in the same school. He's in the Department of Environmental Health.
I don't think he's a doctor.
It's Mr. Peter Bricey.
I should have said professor. Are you an MD?
Yes,
Where did you take your undergraduate work?
I got an undergraduate degree from Stanford University.
Then where did you go to medical school?
Stanford also,
When did you graduate from Stanford?
1967.
That's medical school, 67.
Yes,
Would you give us an outline of your training?
I got further training, specialized training after I left Stanford. In 1969, I got a Master of Public Health degree from a Harvard College of Public Health. In 1971, a Doctor of Public Health degree from the same institution. From 1971 to 73, I served with the National Center for Health Statistics as an epidemiologist. And since 1973, when I came to Seattle, I've worked both at the university and jointly at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center.
You spend part of your time in each?
That's right.
How much time do you spend at the University of Washington?
That's hard to say exactly. I'd say about 60%, equal parts roughly.
What do you do at the University of Washington?
Well, associate professor subsumes it all, but the usual combination of research and teaching.
What kind of research are you involved in?
Primarily cancer research, epidemiology being the study of the causes of disease, and cancer epidemiology being the study of the causes of cancer.
What's your particular interest in that field?
My particular interest is in the relationship of hormones, endocrine factors to cancer.
What direction is your research taking? What are you?
Well, the particular kinds of cancer I'm studying right now are mostly cancer in women, uterine, ovarian, large bowel cancer.
How long have you been actively involved in this research?
Oh, ever since I came to Seattle.
Does this take up most of your time?
I'd say somewhat more than half, and the remainder is teaching and a little administrative work.
How do you go about your research on cancer and hormones aspect of it?
Well, it's largely the same way an epidemiologist goes about studying cancer in any hormones or not. You've got several approaches available, but in the broadest sense, it's making observations on the population.
With statistics?
Yes, you try in a systematic way to observe what's happened and attempt to make inferences from what you observe to what might be the factors that might have pre-caused these cancers to develop.
Could you give us just a brief example of how this would work?
Sure. Let me give you 2 examples, if I might. Let's talk about cancer of the uterus, for example. One thing we do is check and see if the ratings of this disease might be changing over a period of time. This particular disease, they've changed quite a bit. Say they've doubled in the last decade. What they then do is try and determine what else we could see that has changed in the past decade that might relate to this sort of cancer. That's one particular piece of work that I did. An alternative approach might be to take women with this particular cancer and look into their past and see how they might differ from a group of women who don't get the cancer, again, with respect to things you think might be related. That's a general approach that's used.
Okay, do you have assistants that help you in gathering the statistics?
Oh, yeah.
I take it that part of your work would be supervising students or assistants who actually interview women?
That's correct.
How many interviews would be involved? Do you have any idea?
In the last several years, we've interviewed perhaps 2,000 women.
And then the other approach is, how do you get the statistics?
Right, when I first came in 1973, I was responsible for establishing something called the Cancer Surveillance System, which is a system whereby the cancer incidence in the western part of the state of Washington is determined. It's basically a matter of systematically going to hospitals and identifying patients who develop cancer and keeping track of it that way.
You mentioned when you or your associates interview women with uterus cancer, we'll say, as compared to those that do not have uterus cancer, you check certain things in their background which you think might be a contributing factor. What kind of things?
Well, in this particular instance, the thing of particular interest is the prior use of estrogen-containing hormones.
That is one example, but even more commonly, these menopausal estrogens, Premarin, for example.
Why do you inquire about the estrogen use?
Okay, it's getting into the subject now, but basically you're interested in anything you think might stimulate the uterine tissue to grow, because that's the kind of thing you know. If anything's going to cause cancer, it might be something like that. Estrogens are hormones naturally produced and naturally do cause the uterine tissue to grow more rapidly. Therefore, it's the kind of thing that when taken externally, you're also interested in. The other main reason is I mentioned that if you look at things that are changing, possibly it's parallel to changing rates of disease, and estrogen preparations are being used much more now than they were 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay, so you ask this question because there is suspicion, at least, that estrogen can contribute to uterus cancer?
That's right.
And that's based, I take it, on at least two things. Number one, something that is used now that wasn't used 20 years ago. Number two, that it can cause increase in uterus tissue.
Tissue growth, yes, not necessarily malignant growth, but right. I might add, you probably don't care, but as an aside, many of the questions we ask aren't nearly so well targeted as that one. We tend to ask questions about background information, more to pick up clues than anything else. This particular question on estrogens is more focused than most.
Okay, have you done any research work within your specialty on polychlorinated biphenyls?
No, the only work I've done relating to occupational exposures was a recent study collaboratively with a graduate student on the study of Boilermakers in Seattle and the possible relationship of that occupation exposure and cancer, but that's the closest my research has carried me.
What was the suspected cause, if that's a good word, in the Boilermakers?
It was a very weak suspicion about possible welders within that union might have inhaled some of the materials, the metals, that might have possibly led to lung cancer increase. But in general, it was more of sort of a checkout of the union to look for things rather than to test existing hypotheses of the materials of metals.
I take it when you haven't interviewed people with cancer who have a known exposure to PCBs.
That's correct.
How did you become aware of the case of Starbuck and Curtis?
I was contacted by Ms. Cochran for my opinion on the material.
Do you know how she got your name?
I think she mentioned she got it through Dr. William Johnson at the School of Public Health.
When were you first contacted?
I'd have to check, but I think it was in July of '78.
Your initial contact, I take it, was by telephone?
Yes,
Then was there a follow-up with correspondence?
yes,
Have you brought that correspondence with you today?
yes.
Could I see that first, please?
Sure, it's all here in one stage or another. Maybe the easiest way is if I just look at it and see what I think is important.
Okay.
Doctor, in response to Ms. Cochran's letter or telephone call and sending you various things to review, I understand you wrote her a letter dated July 18, 1978, and you brought that with you and showed me a copy?
Right.
Doctor, I believe the enclosure was a summary of your thoughts, and you start off by listing what you thought was evidence suggesting that polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, would be carcinogenic in man. I'd like to just go over those if you would, Doctor.
You want me to read it?
Yes, would you please?
Several species, including primates, are known to produce electrophilic metabolites of PCBs. Electrophiles are believed to represent ultimate chemical carcinogens, and these specific PCB metabolites are known to be capable of binding in cellular macromolecules, another necessary ingredient for carcinogenesis. Okay, now,
Is this his letter?
Yes,
What's the date of it?
July 18, 1978. What's the importance of primates in such a study?
sure, well, every species is different, but as we all know, some are more similar to man than others, man being a primate, and if you find something in other primates, it's more likely that the same thing will apply for us, this kind of primate.
You said several species, including primates, are known to produce electrophilic metabolites, PCBs. What are electrophilic metabolites?
It's a thing that I probably can't explain terribly well because it's getting a little out of my field, but basically an electrophile from the word itself is something that pulls electrons, and chemically these agents, which there are many, are the ones that when we have a known carcinogen, many of them are electrophiles as well. Now, metabolites simply means that it's a product that the body converts PCBs into a metabolite. Another product similar to PCBs, which is an electrophile.
And you go on to say that electrophiles are believed to represent ultimate chemical carcinogens,
Right?
and these specific PCB metabolites are known to be capable of binding to cellular macromolecules, another necessary ingredient of carcinogenesis. Okay, you say electrophiles are being believed to represent ultimate chemical carcinogens. What do you mean by that?
Well, nobody's exactly sure, but one thought is that at some point something has to interact with a cell to make that cell grow abnormally. We call that the definition of malignancy and abnormality of cell growth. Well, what is it that can induce this abnormality of cell growth? Well, one, the kinds of things that do this, that we know do this, various TARs or various agents that we know in animals, and in man as well, that cause cancer have this property. They are electrophiles, and the rest of that paragraph is that at least in some species or something of that sort, these electrophiles seem to be able to actually get to the cell. They bind with these big molecules, macromolecules in the cell. So at least it's plausible that because of the nature of PCBs and their metabolites that they could cause cancer.
Doctor, in your review of your literature, do you agree that PCBs are a fairly unstable chemical and stay in the body for some time?
They're fairly stable.
Fairly stable?
That's right.
Now, secondly, you said PCBs are eliminated from the body at a very slow rate, allowing the chronic exposure often needed for carcinogenesis. This is because it's a stable type of compound?
That's right. It doesn't degrade very rapidly.
Were there studies that were furnished to you that would so indicate?
I don't believe so. It's hard for me to remember if that particular piece of information and the previous one came from the material that was given to me. More likely it came from material that I pursued on my own.
Before I get farther, what material did you pursue on your own?
Particularly helpful was an article in something called The Origins of Human Cancer. It's a 3-volume set, Cold Spring Harbor Symposium, which I participated in the symposium. And I have these volumes in my office, and there was one chapter on polychlorinated biphenyls.
Would you say that again?
I'm sorry, Cold Spring Harbor Symposium. That particular article particularly dealt with these aspects of sort of the nature of PCBs, less in respect to their potential to cause cancer, just evidence of that, but for their chemical properties, which I hadn't known too well up to that point.
And you gave as a third reason suggesting that polychlorinated biphenyls could be carcinogenic in man. Hepatocellular carcinoma has developed in rodents exposed to PCBs. Do you remember what studies you gleaned that information from?
Those are in the packet.
Hepatocellular carcinoma. Could you give us a definition of that?
Cancer of the liver.
I didn't hear that. Cancer of what?
Liver?
And as of what reason a study of PCB exposed workers found an increased incidence of melanoma and pancreatic cancer increase largely confined to a group of workers with high exposure? What's melanoma?
That's a type of skin cancer.
And pancreatic cancer, I take it that's cancer of the pancreas?
Right.
Where's the pancreas located?
It's one of the digestive organs in the abdomen.
Is that the lower part of the abdomen?
Well, the pancreatic duct leads into the beginning of the intestines, basically just below the stomach.
Is the type of cancer, melanoma and pancreatic cancer, is that the same cellular type of cancer?
Not at all.
Different type?
We're stopping there. Okay. I just realized we did some of this about a month ago. Who remembers it? Anybody?
They put it out of their mind.
Yeah. Okay. Next is some warm up from the same transcript. That will be a 12-minute 200 take. There you go. Take one, pass it down. And we're going to start off by doing some of this for readback. It'll just be a short segment, but I need for you guys to take a look at your notes. So let's take this for readback. And we're going to do about, I don't know, probably 4 minutes. This is a court case. This isn't going to work. Well, you know what? We're going to do a little bit of this. Or should I run and get a transcript? I'm going to run and get a deposition transcript. I'm sorry. I'll be right back.
Well, that was tough. That was tough reading for you. And you.
Workout. Yeah. You're so smart, doctor.
All I had to say was, could you
I love
repeat that?
They think it's a,
I can't believe it's May.
I know.
Gosh.
Mayday.
Where's the flagpole?
I don't know, with the little ribbons on it, the little crepe paper.
dance around it. Is that what they do?
Yes. When I was in
The
third grade, I
maypole.
was so tiny that there was somebody absent in the third grade, and when I was in the third grade, there was somebody absent in the first grade. And I was so tiny, I had to go in the first grade paper.
Oh, and you never forgot that.
I got to do the third grade too, but
Oh.
had to do the first grade too.
Oh.
All those little
Isn't that
babies,
funny?
and me, an older kid.
Okay,
It's
this is
important at that
interesting.
age.
My husband is on, he has to call for jury duty
Oh,
this week in San Joaquin County, and my daughter has the same thing in Sacramento County.
really?
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
I had to do that, but I didn't show up at a qualifier. Like, forgot to call.
And what did they do?
9
Anything?
a.m. Sure, like.
It probably didn't go. It was probably one of those things where you didn't have to show up, maybe?
No, I did. I had a badge number and everything. I just didn't show up.
So you called and they said, show up at,
No, I forgot to call, forgot to contact.
oh, that's what I mean. When you call with your badge number, sometimes they say,
Yeah, they dismissed
you
me.
don't have
Yeah.
to show up, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe you got lucky.
I did the same thing, but I sent in a letter saying I got a student and blah, blah, blah. And then I forgot to call to check if they accepted it. And I was like, yeah. So they
Oh.
know we accepted it. I was like,
I didn't even care. I was like, I have a qualifier. I thought it'll be fine without me. I knew it anyways.
Okay, so sorry, here we go. This is going to be deposition. I am attorney for defense 2, Mr. Sharp.
I am the witness.
Attorney for Defense 1, Mr. Frost.
Plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Otar.
And this is for readback, and let's read it in 16s, please. Okay, we're beginning with Mr. Otar.
For the record, prior to the sale of the property, do you recall reading that the building had been changed and remodeled several times without a coherent overall plan? Do you recall reading that prior to last year?
No,
Do you even have a recollection as to whether you saw this report prior to the close of escrow?
Objection, argumentative.
Do you recall reading this report prior to the close of escrow?
do I recall reading it?
Yes.
I am sure I did, but I don't recall the actual reading of it, no.
Why are you sure that you did?
Because if it was the inspection report, it was part of my practice to go over it with my client.
Do you recall going over it with your client?
No,
Was it your understanding at that time that the property at 1485 Clagmore Road had been remodeled?
I wasn't sure it had been added on to. It appeared to have been remodeled.
Do you recall if your understanding at that time was that the garage had been converted to a living space?
At that time?
Yeah.
No, I don't remember back at the time.
Do you recall whether you did an inspection of the property at all?
Objection. Asked and answered.
You can answer the question.
I'm sure I did an inspection. I did an inspection of every house that I sold.
But can you specifically recall whether or not you did an inspection of the property at 1485 Clagmore Road prior to last year?
No,
Objection. Argumentative.
I cannot specifically remember doing the inspection. Did I do the inspection? Yes.
How do you know that you did one?
Well, for one thing, there is a report that I filled out. Secondly, it was standard practice.
It says here in a disclosure statement, we're going to attach as plaintiff's exhibit number 2, that the kitchen floor was uneven in areas. Do you recall that as you sit here today, that the kitchen floors were uneven?
No,
Can you recall anything specifically from your inspection of the property? Can you recall anything that sticks in your mind?
Objection asked and answered.
I don't remember doing the inspection.
I would ask the court reporter to mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 2. If you could take a look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 2 and tell me if this is your signature. It appears on page 3.
Excuse me, could I see Exhibit 2 from the witness?
Sure.
I am going to object to Exhibit 2 on the grounds that it isn't the full disclosure statement that the Reeds received.
If you could tell me if that's your signature that appears.
Yes,
Okay. Down by your handwriting, it says, the house needs finish work. As you sit here today, can you recall what you meant by needs finish work?
no, I don't remember what I meant at that time.
Well, as you sit here now, what do you think needs finished work? What do you think that would?
Objection calls for speculation and lack of foundation.
Well, let me ask you this. If you were to write on a disclosure statement now, needs finished work, what would you mean by that?
Objection. Calls for speculation. It's also irrelevant. He is no longer a real estate agent.
You can answer.
Probably trim or cabinetry or general things like that. Basically, there are portions that aren't finished.
Well, as you sit here today, can you recall that there were portions of the property unfinished at the time of this transaction?
Asked and answered.
Yes, like I said before, I can vaguely remember trim and things like that.
Okay.
Okay, let's pull up your notes. Take a look.
I fell asleep.
What was the name of defense one?
Frost.
Okay, and what about
Old tar?
Okay, let's have, you want to start, Amy? Okay, thank you.
Question by Mr. Oates. Prior to the sale of the property, do you recall reading that the building had been changed and remodeled several times without a coherent
Mm-hmm.
overall plan? Do you recall reading that prior to last year? Answer, no. Question, do you even have a recollection as to whether you saw this report prior to the close of escrow? Mr. Frost, objection, argumentative. Question by Mr. O'Teller, do you recall reading this prior to the close of escrow? Answer, do I recall reading it? Question, yes. Answer, I'm sorry. Question, I'm sure I did, but I don't recall the
Helper?
something of it.
Actual reading.
Actual reading of it. Question. Why are you sure you did?
That you did.
That you did. Answer, because if it was in the
If it was the,
inspection report, it was part of my practice to go over it with my client.
yep, good, thanks. Kristen?
Question, do you recall going over it with your client? Answer, no. Question, was it your understanding at that time that the property at 1485 something more road,
Flagmore.
Blackmore Road had been remodeled? Answer, I wasn't sure it had been added onto. It appeared to be,
To have been.
Remodeled. Question, do you recall if your understanding at that time was that your garage had been converted to living space? Answer, at that time? Question, yeah. Answer, no, I don't remember exactly that time. Question, do you recall whether you did an inspection of the property at all? Mr. Frost, objection, asked and answered. Mr. Olto, I can answer, or you can answer the question. Answer, I'm sure I did an inspection. I did an inspection of every house I sold.
Thank you. Whitney?
Question. Something recall whether or not,
But can you specifically?
can you specifically recall whether or not you did an inspection of the property at 1485 Flagmore Road prior to last year? Answer, no. Mr. Frost, objection, argumentative. The witness, I cannot specifically remember doing an inspection.
I have the inspection.
The inspection, did I do the inspection? Yes. Question by Mr. Otar.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that you did one? Answer, well, for one thing, there is a report that I filled out. Secondly, it was standard practice. Question, it says here in the disclosure statement,
In a,
disclosure statement. Okay, I don't understand.
we're going to attach as plaintiffs.
Plaintiff exhibit number 2,
Mm-hmm.
that the kitchen floor.
That the kitchen floor,
That the kitchen floor was, how do you recall?
uneven in areas.
Uneven areas, do you recall that as you sit here today, that the kitchen floor were uneven? Answer, no. Question, can you recall something of the property?
Okay, got a little drop there. Can you recall anything specifically from your inspection of the,
Property? Can you recall can you recall if anything?
just anything?
Anything that sticks in your mind? And then I missed the identifier.
Mr. Sharp?
Mr. Sharp, objection, asked and answered. The witness, I don't remember doing the inspection.
Good. Joanna?
Question by Mr. Otar. I would ask the court reporter to mark this as something for exhibit.
Plaintiffs?
Plaintiff exhibit 2.
Yep, careful, because it's not a question. That would have been just colloquy. Mr. Otar?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Exhibit 2, if you could have a look of exhibit number 2 and tell me if this.
Look at exhibit 2.
Mine is exhibit 2.
And tell me if this is your signature. I'm sorry. Tell me if this is your signature. It appears on page 3. Mr. Sharp, excuse me, could I see exhibit 2 from the witness? Mr. Otar, sure. Mr. Sharp, I'm going to object to Exhibit 2 on the grounds that it isn't the full. It isn't the full. It's something sure. Like disclosure statement that the reads received. Mr. Otar, if you could tell me if that's your signature that appears. The witness, yes. Question by Mr. Otar, okay. Do you know by your handwriting, it says the house needs.
Down.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
down by your.
Down by your handwriting, it says the house needs finish work. As you sit here today, can you recall what you meant by needs finished work? Answer, no, I don't remember what I meant at that time. Question, as you sit here now, what do you think needs finished work? What do you think that would?
Mm-hmm. Dash,
Mr. Sharp, objection called for speculation and lack of foundation. Oh, this is when you're, okay.
yep,
Lack
and
of
that's good,
foundation.
and I'm gonna stop you there,
Okay.
thank you. Ann, go ahead, thanks.
Well,
Let me ask you this,
let
if,
me ask you this, if you were to write on a closure statement now, what would you do by that?
now needs finish work, what would, yes? Okay, just a minute, objection calls for speculation, it's, I have a question by Mr. Otar, you can answer.
Probably trim or trim tree or general that. Basically, there are portions that are finished. Mr. Well, as you sit here today, can you recall that there were portions of the property that were unfinished at the time?
Do you have that word?
I have that word.
I don't think it was set, go ahead.
Unfinished at the time.
Transaction.
Transaction. Mr. Cross answered the witness, yes, like I said before, they cleared.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're gonna go back and read this now in 14th. So this is gonna sound quite a bit faster. We were kind of slow on that. So, again, I am Mr. Sharp for defense 2.
The witness,
Attorney for Defense 1, Mr. Frost.
Plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Otar.
And we want to do this in 14th. We got about 5 minutes. What'd you put on the board there? Oh, plaintiff's exhibit.
Let me ask you this.
Oh, let me ask you this. SKLIS.
For let me ask you this, I put Lex. If that
Yeah,
doesn't work.
Lex. Okay. Begins with a question by Mr. Otar for the record. Prior to the sale of the property, do you recall reading that the building had been changed and remodeled several times without a coherent overall plan? Do you recall reading that prior to last year?
no,
Do you even have a recollection as to whether you saw this report prior to the close of escrow?
Objection, argumentative.
Do you recall reading this report prior to the close of escrow?
do I recall reading it?
Yes.
I am sure I did, but I don't recall the actual reading of it, no.
Why are you sure that you did?
Because if it was the inspection report, it was part of my practice to go over it with my client,
Do you recall going over it with your client?
no.
Was it your understanding at that time that the property at 1485 Clagmore Road had been remodeled?
I wasn't sure it had been added on to, it appeared to have been remodeled.
Do you recall if your understanding at that time was that the garage had been converted to living space?
At that time,
Yeah.
I don't remember back at the time.
Do you recall whether you did an inspection of the property at all?
Objection, asked and answered.
You can answer the question.
I'm sure I did an inspection. I did an inspection of every house that I sold.
But can you specifically recall whether or not you did an inspection of the property at 1485 Clagmore Road prior to last year?
No,
Objection, argumentative.
I cannot specifically remember doing the inspection. I did do the inspection, yes.
How do you know that you did one?
Well, for one thing, there is a report that I filled out. Secondly, it was standard practice.
It says here in a disclosure statement, we're going to attach as plaintiff's exhibit number 2 that the kitchen floor was uneven in areas. Do you recall as you sit here today that the kitchen floors were uneven?
No,
Can you recall anything specifically from your inspection of the property? Can you recall anything that sticks in your mind?
Objection, asked and answered.
I don't remember doing the inspection.
I would ask the court reporter to mark this as plaintiff's exhibit 2. If you could take a look at plaintiff's exhibit 2 and tell me if this is your signature, it appears on page 3.
Excuse me, could I see exhibit 2 from the witness?
Sure.
I'm going to object to exhibit 2 on the grounds that it isn't the full disclosure statement that the Reeds received.
If you could tell me if that's your signature that
Yes.
appears. Okay, down by your handwriting, it says the house needs finish work. As you sit here today, can you recall what you meant by needs finish work?
No, I don't remember what I meant at that time.
Well, as you sit here now, what do you think needs finish work? What do you think that would?
Objection, calls for speculation.
And lack of foundation.
Well, let me ask you this. If you were to write on a disclosure statement now, needs finish work, what would you mean by that?
Objection, calls for speculation. It's also irrelevant. He is no longer a real estate agent.
You can answer.
Probably trim or cabinetry or general things like that. Basically, there are portions that aren't finished.
Well, as you sit here today, can you recall that there were portions of the property unfinished at the time of the transaction?
Asked and answered.
Yes, like I said before, I can vaguely remember trim and things like that.
Okay, now looking at plaintiff's exhibit 1, it states here some various problems with the property. Beams overspanned, small water leak in the rear bathroom, etc. I'm just wondering if you had, in fact, received this report about the time this disclosure statement was filled out. That's plaintiff's exhibit 2. I'm just wondering why any of the defects that are listed in plaintiff's exhibit 1 wouldn't have been placed in plaintiff's exhibit 2.
Objection, misstates the record. This is dated February 12 and the disclosure statement is dated February 16.
I would also object. The question is vague and compound, and I am instructing him not to answer.
With my objection, I meant the last signature is dated February 16th. The first signatures are dated February 15th. The report is dated February 23rd.
Do you recall if this disclosure statement was filled out prior to your receipt of the inspection report from Pyramid Construction?
I don't recall.
Do you recall if you had any discussions with Jim Bunning prior to filling out the disclosure statement?
No.
Do you recall any conversations with any person last year that related to this Pyramid Construction?
I don't remember any discussions with anyone.
Can you recall Jim Bunning? I mean, do you remember meeting with him at any time?
No, I don't remember it. I couldn't tell you what he looked like.
Had you ever hired Mr. Bunning prior to the transaction with the Reeds?
I don't think I did.
Did you ever hire him after this transaction with the Reeds?
I don't think I did.
I'm going to object to both of those questions in that they assume facts not in evidence. That is, that he hired him.
Do you recall if you had made contact with Mr. Bunning to obtain this inspection report that's attached as plaintiff's exhibit 1?
Not until I attended Paula Reed's deposition.
Okay, after that time, do you recall contacting Mr. Bunning to have him inspect the property at 1485 Clagmore Road?
I believe I did, but I don't recall the actual occasion.
Do you know where you got Mr. Bunning's number from or how you managed to pick him?
No, I had heard of Pyramid Construction, I am quite sure before, but I don't know in what context.
Okay. I'm going to end this, pause the recording and restart it, and then we're going to do a 12-minute 200 from this material.